This week, I interview my co-hosts, well, at least one of them, to discuss CISO transition, a CISO's perspective. In the leadership and communication section, they said a CISO does what? 5 tips to be an awesome CISO, 9 tips for an effective ransomware negotiation, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful, real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter to succeed. CyberSync continuous control automation ingests data from the IT GRC stack to update controls against regulatory requirements and risks in real time, delivering insights and visibility. See how members of the Fortune 500 are saving millions annually by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSync.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 242, recorded November 29th, 2021. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado. Joining me remotely are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Matt. How's it going? Good to see you on this wonderful Cyber Monday.
That's right. It's Cyber Monday today. Did anybody do any Black Friday shopping? I didn't, so I guess I got to do it today.
No shopping. Yeah, just doing a little shopping today online, but nothing in person.
There you go. Unfortunately, Mr. Albuquerque is out sick. We'll get to more of that in a second. So sitting in for him today is my second co-host, Mr. Tyler Robinson. Welcome, Tyler.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. I'm glad you're here keeping my budget intact on this Cyber Monday.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'll do my best. Join us for our next live webcast on December 2nd to see what's under the XDR hood. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to save your seat. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Throughout 2022, CRA's Business Intelligence Unit will be releasing research reports on the top topics across the security industry. Our first report will be on third-party risk and the supply chain. To register or to participate in the survey, please visit securityweekly.com/third-party risk. The results will be shared at our third-party risk e-summit in January. All right, so let me give you the context for this segment. With the holidays, we had a cancellation, which is fine. So I came up with this great topic last week that I was going to interview Jason and Ben about CISO transition, both being CISOs, both having transitioned in the role. I thought this would be great little topic. And then unfortunately, Jason got sick over Thanksgiving. I think he's got the Omicron variant of COVID or something. Anyways, the whole family's sick, so he can't join us today. So my best laid plans just kind of got completely blown up. So Tyler, thanks for stepping in. Ben, you're going to be a good sport because we're both going to grill you because Jason's not here to save you.
I'll do my best. I was looking forward to Jason kind of throwing some stuff in every now and then with the good dialogue, but we'll see what we can do today.
Yeah, we'll do our best. So, Ben, where I want to start is we cover a ton of these articles. Every week, I pull in different articles around the role of the CISO, the changing role of the CISO, board communications, all kinds of stuff. And we've covered transition stories and articles and all this stuff. What I thought would be really interesting is, let's start with first the concept of the CISO and the role of the CISO and these different types of CISOs. I think it was Janae and Budge over at Forrester kind of outlined the 6 different types of CISOs. I'm curious, what do you classify yourself as? What type of CISO are you?
Yeah, it's a good question, Matt. So yes, Virginia, there is a CISO. What type is obviously the question. And I think I've actually been doing some talks on this publicly. I think it's really what type are you? And then what type is a company looking for? And, out of those 6 types, I kind of classify myself as transformational and kind of evangelist / customer facing, right? I think when you think about it, nobody really pegs into really one specific role. But I definitely think there are different types of CISOs. I've run into a lot of them, a lot of different colleagues in my career, people I've worked with or, just interacted with. But then I also think on that same level, there are a lot of different positions in companies that are not what you'd expect, right? When you get into that role, and that misalignment can be a lot of the problem.
Yeah, because when I think about articles that we cover sometimes, you see that post-breach CISO announcement, right? Somebody coming in after a company's been breached. That has not been you in your career, and I don't think it's been Jason either. You guys were never really post-breach CISO roles at all.
No, and I think that's an opportunity kind of thing. I actually don't mind the risk, right? I think that there's potentially a lot of risk there, but it's a lot of recovery. And I think I would align post-breach to somewhat to transformational, right? There's a lot of recovery. There's a lot of build out. There's a lot of, restructure, trying to reinvigorate or re-energize a program. So I think that they're similar. I've just never had that opportunity where I've walked in post-breach, right? And I think a lot of times those roles, those post-breach roles, tend to be somebody who's kind of moving on really quickly, right? Like they go from breach to breach. And it makes sense, right? I mean, there's just sometimes a specific toolkit or specific set of skills that you're looking for to bring in and fix. But then that, hopefully that post-breach mentality doesn't last very long, right? That shifts to something else. And so I think those guys then look for that other opportunity.
Does the maturity and the place that the organization is in their kind of security roadmap, does that change how you CISO them or how you come in and adopt one of those personality traits or roles?
Yeah, I think it does in a way. I'd say, the maturity journey still could have a specific type you need, but I think if, a lot of companies that are low on their journey, low on the maturity scale, I think they're typically thinking of someone who's super technical or, a traditional / kind of steady state kind of guy. And I would say the more aspirational you get, the more it kind of shifts into that either transformational or, needing somebody who can be more customer facing. I've seen a lot of organizations lately that you wouldn't necessarily have thought needed somebody customer facing are starting to realize there's an external role for a CISO, right? There's a PR side to that, something to engage with customers, right? And so I think as you change in that journey, it definitely changes, how I'm approaching it. I think how you approach the program and the maturity definitely changes what type of CISO is going to be good at what stage in that journey, right?
Yeah, and what I think both you and Jason have been that kind of customer-facing CISO role, right? The role, the part of the role you played at Qualys, the role you played at Tenable was very customer-facing. Jason was very customer-facing with the service provider, with Carousel, because that's what they needed, right? You need somebody that can communicate aspects of security and risk and how you're preparing and protecting data with the customer side. And so there is a very valid customer facing aspect to this. But I think to Tyler's point, maturity is part of this because a lot of us think about the CISO in that very technical, kind of tactical role. And maybe that's the first kind of level of CISO when you think about it from a maturity perspective.
Yeah, and that's why I said, like, people who are low on that maturity scale or early on their journey, they're typically looking for that very, you know, tactical person, right? Who comes from the technical background because they see that role, the CISO role, as a technical role. And so that's where I think the mismatch gets into, of where, you know, you could be, you know, looking for kind of that technical person, but then you ultimately realize that what you really need is somebody transformational, because the business itself is actually shifting. And so, you know, Jason and I talk about that a lot on you know, when we're going back and forth, is being business aligned. And that's where the mismatch comes from, when the CISO is mature enough to realize that the business needs something different than the business actually thinks that they need, right? Or, you know, the CSAP thinks that they need. And so the interaction is, you know, why are you getting out of your lane, just staying the technical, when you're trying to say, hey, we're going through a transformational journey? There's a large impact that the CISO can make. And I'll equate that to when I was at Aristocrat. So Aristocrat had never had a CISO before. They didn't have people, they didn't have process, and they didn't have technology. Like no leg of the triad was there. And so when I came in, I think, you know, that being the first CISO for an organization, they had definite expectations of what they thought that role was, but ultimately they were trying to get out of this legacy business of gaming and casinos and get more into a digital, kind of shift the mix from, you know, heavy legacy and low digital to high digital, low legacy, right? Because that's where the business was going. And so aligning to that from a security program was much different, because it wasn't, you know, old school data centers. It was, how do you integrate into Azure and AWS and do, you know, really fast agile development, and how do you integrate with those teams to create enablement? And so I also, from that perspective, because I gravitated towards that, I have that customer facing evangelist side to me. It was something I wanted to do. And I think something that I was able to articulate to the business. Look, our customers have a need to know we're secure, and that can be a differentiator for us if we actually advocate for it and discuss it and integrate that into our methodology. And, you know, customers really value that. And I think companies are starting to understand that they need that public facing component of the security program, and it can be a real differentiator, a real enabler. So it's kind of understanding what the company's looking for, who you are, and how you can make the best fit of those. But again, sometimes you go into that situation, you're a transformational guy, they're looking for steady state, and it's misalignment, and you're unhappy, they're unhappy, and it just creates this friction. So that's a lot of what I try to discover when I'm out there looking, is trying to figure out, like, what are you actually looking for, right? Because that's going to breed long-term success and happiness for both, you know, the company and the CISO.
That's why I started with this talk track initially, because that leads me into the next piece is, why do CISOs start looking, right? Now, you mentioned one of them, misalignment, right? You're a transformational CISO, they're looking for steady state. There's a mismatch, right out of the gate. Why else do CISOs start to look, though? Because there has to be other reasons than just a mismatch.
There are. I mean, you know, the easiest one to point to is money, right? Compensation. So the market is, I would say, kind of crazy now. It's just the acceleration in people looking for CISOs right now is kind of at a very steep rise. And so, you know, you could be in a role where you realize you're severely underpaid, and as a result, like, the impetus is there when somebody knocks on your door and says, "Hey, I can double your salary." Like, that's a big driver, right? I think the other is just, you know, you may have gotten to a place at that company where you've done kind of all you can, right? I think, again, if you look at the types of CISOs that are out there, you know, if the post-breach guy comes in and does his thing, like, you could consider that misalignment, but it's just progression, right? It's maturity. And so as the maturity of the company goes up and they reach a next level, they may need a different person to do that role. I think also there's just that drive to do more and create, right? That a lot of people have in the CISO role. Some people are happy just being maintainers. And again, I would align that maybe to the type of CISO. Like, maybe you find yourself in that traditional or steady state role, and you just are happy kind of keeping things going. But, you know, for me, it's always been, you know, once you kind of build something, okay, what else is there to build, right? It can come down to funding. A lot of people, when the company is in not a positive place and the funding starts to dry up, that could be an issue. I see another thing where you'll have a replacement and a change of management. So, it's been traditional for people to report to the CIO. So CIO gets replaced, and you don't have that alignment or that mesh with the CIO. Or you're working with the CEO and he moves on. Like all those things can create potentials for movement in the community. I mean, it's not much different than anything else, other than I would say it's a high demand area right now, and usually the people who are doing really well they're high performers and they've got high drive, and so they want to be motivated and they want to feel like they're actually contributing and making a difference. And so I think if you don't feel like you're making a difference, that's certainly an impetus to potentially start looking or taking calls.
Is there good advice that you can provide for maybe people coming up looking to get into the CISO role, where maybe they're in the VP role or a director role, or even organizations? Is there use cases where it makes sense to use the institutional knowledge and hire from within the ranks of people that may be doing some of the traditional CISO roles and keeping that internally?
I think it's a great idea. If you're at an organization and you're a VP, senior vice president, something, and, depending upon the size of the organization, and the CISO moves on, like you should have already, a year or two ahead of time tried to create that alignment where you're seen as the natural successor. And, one of the things I think that's really important at the C-level is to really have a succession plan in place. So if you don't have a succession plan as a CISO, I think you need to start thinking about that and looking at your leadership team and figuring out, who would you potentially put forward. And that's one of the things I think, if you're a CISO looking to move on to another org, other orgs want to see that you've kind of thought that through and you're working on that for the success of the organization. So I think mentoring is a big part of any leadership role, mentoring the people who, either you report to or, you might have tangential interaction with in the organization. And I think bringing those people up is a great idea. If you can find somebody, if an organization CISO is moving on and they have somebody who's in that VP role or a director role who's done a really good job, who's shown leadership talent, they know where the bodies are buried. They know the organization, right? They know the political structure of the organization. So it can be really successful. And actually, it's probably one of the best ways to get into the CISO role, is to, they have an understanding of your experience level and your characteristics that would make you potentially a good fit for that. Whereas looking for an outside CISO role, sometimes that's hard if you don't already have the title, trying to get the title, right? And you have to kind of know a different class of people, I guess. If you're an individual contributor looking for a manager role, you probably have a lot of contacts in security, and somebody may say, "Hey, I know this guy; he's really good." Manager looking for a director, same thing. Director looking for a VP, same thing. You know people in that org structure. You've worked for people before that may have moved on. The challenge with a CISO trying your first CISO role is, one, you've got to find somebody who gives you that opportunity, and two, it could be a different set of people that you're not used to interacting with, right? Especially as the CISO role moves out from under the CIO, that interaction where you've got that Rolodex of CEOs that you may know or have worked with to call and say, "Hey, I'm looking," that gets smaller and smaller and gets harder to source. So I think, especially for first-time CISOs, trying to get to that seat internally is a really good path for that.
So you said purpose. I agree with you 100%. The one thing you didn't say is stress and burnout, which we've seen a lot of stress and burnout articles lately, and it's funny you didn't mention that at all. So you must not be working hard enough.
But no, look, I mean, like, what's your expectation as a CISO, that you're going to go to another CISO role and there's going to be less stress and less burnout? You'd have to step to a really well-run organization that you don't have any risk, and there are a few of those, right? Everybody's got some risk or some issues. So I think I didn't list it because, I don't think the expectation, especially if you're taking on a new role for the first 6 months, it's going to be more hectic, if anything, right? I definitely think if people are overworked, or if the company isn't respecting or figuring it, like if you're not getting budget to hire the right resources, and that's increasing your stress load, that could definitely be a reason why you're looking to leave, right?
Yeah.
But that I typically throw more into like the budget, allocation side, not really that I have stress. That's kind of a, I don't know, a result of an underlying problem, not the problem in and of itself. Like, this is a stressful role. Like, it's not an ivory tower hanging out and just, having fun every day. It's very stressful. And it's a set of different, for those aspiring to be a CISO, it's a different set of skills than maybe you think. I mean, figure out how to do budgeting, right? Figure out how to do people management. It's a lot of that. And, the technical is less and less a part of the role. And it's more and more business and, the other issues that face all C-level executives.
Yeah. So as you look for the next role, what do you look for? What are the key signs that this is an opportunity you're interested in? Because again, it goes back to what type of CISO are you, but specifically, what are you looking for?
Alignment, right? I'm looking for commitment. I mean, I think the biggest thing is, are they taking the role seriously? So one of the things that I talk about first is, probably before compensation, is what's the reporting alignment look like, right? What's the reporting structure? How often is board interaction happening? Does the CEO take this seriously? Is it alignment? Is it under the CEO or is it under a CIO? If it's under the CIO, like where did he come from? What's his vision? Like, I want to know a lot about the management structure of the organization to really understand, is this the role that I'm interested in? Past that, it starts to become more about, what space does it play in? Does it align with something that excites me, right? Is it technology? Do you like finance? Like, what are the sectors that you really want to participate in? And some of those things are just higher risk. So I think the more risk tolerant you are, the more potentially exciting things can be, right? If you're less risk tolerant, you want something that's a lot more steady state, not going to have a lot of potential risk for it. And so I think that's something that any individual looking for these roles needs to understand where their tolerance lies. And then after that, it's things like, what are the salary? What are the benefits? Like, I think one of the things that everybody should be thinking about right now is, are you covered on D&O insurance of the company, right? If something goes wrong, are you going to be covered legally, right? If they come after you, if you're named in a lawsuit personally. I also think, understanding, what your potential exit is if something goes in a way that it's not supposed to and it's not your fault. If the CFO, the CEO, they have, parachutes attached to them, I think it's time that CISOs start thinking about that too, because it can totally not be your fault. And just from a PR and in the best interest of the company, they may need to cut a scapegoat. And if that's you, it better make fiscal sense for you to be the guy who walked out the door.
Heard it here first. You need to go to the parachute.
Yeah. And it used to not be something that was discussed. And I know several people, and it's something I'm covering in my own discussions, right? Whether it's 6 months, the longest I've heard is a 2-year arrangement, but 6 months to a year, that's pretty typical.
Interesting. All right. So you're there. You're in the new role. What does 30, 60, 90 days look like? Like, what are the first things you have to do when you step in to that new role at that new organization?
So I think that depends upon company maturity and your maturity, right? So, first CISO job, you're coming out of a technical role. Your first thought may be, hey, let me evaluate the technical stack. That's actually something I don't put up at the top of the list, right? What I want to do first is find out who the stakeholders are, make alignment with other C-level executives, and then try to understand the business. Figure out who the players are in the room and how you get inside that circle and how you position yourself to be a service to the other C-level execs and really kind of become a part of that club, that group. Once you've done that, I think then, understanding the business, figuring out the alignment, what are the big drivers, and how can you make some suggestions for some quick impacts that aren't necessarily technologically driven, right? They don't have to be. Evaluate the policy. When was the last time the policy was rewritten? But that 30, 60 days, that should all be about discovery, right? I mean, I don't think any big sweeping changes should be done in that time frame, because you just don't know enough. I mean, you're pulling the trigger without enough evidence. What you want to do is assemble the best and the largest amount of evidence that you can, so you can put some thoughtful recommendations in place that actually position you again with that journey to be a business partner. So how do you create a suggestion that's not necessarily asking for a huge amount of revenue? I mean, you may need to, but how can you put something forward where, whether it's the CEO, the board, they look at you and they think, wow, that was a very thoughtful approach to this, versus, man, he just wants to rip out all the technology we have and start fresh. Like that's not necessarily helpful. And one technology versus another in any given stack isn't going to make a ton of difference. I mean, there's some things I think we all know that we'd rather have as technology if we had our druthers, but you can make things work. It's really about how you set yourself up for long-term success within the company.
So winning friends and influencing people. So if you're not a people person,
yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. It's not security at all, right?
Yeah, it's more of a leadership role. We'll talk about this in the next segment with some of the articles. But here's what I realized. If Jason were on this segment, we'd have to go for a full hour, because you just filled almost a half an hour easily by yourself. And we didn't even get any banter between you and Jason.
Go back and forth.
Yeah, we could probably do this again. You and I can grill Jason the next time, and we'll see how he responds based on.
Matt, like where I think it would be super interesting is like actually getting like 2 or 3 different other people like at different stages, right? So if you ask that same last question of the first time CISO, got to be a much different answer, right? And that's really where the meat is that as you mature, or you're a different type of CISO, how you respond to these questions could be different just because of the perspective and the maturity that you have in the role.
Yeah, which is why I started with which type of CISO are you, Ben? Because I think that dictates a lot of the rest of the conversation. Like, what are the factors that you start looking? What are the things you look for when you go to your next company? And what do you do when you get there? I think really depend on the type of CISO you are, because there's kind of this maturity built in a little bit to that CISO type.
Yeah, I think you're right? Because if you think about it, like I definitely early in my career, I did some customer facing stuff, right? I was on the sales side, sales engineering, and that's kind of colored my perspective. And then, being at Nokia for a long time, like having that international experience and the different perspective of how sometimes Americans are perceived, right? Like that definitely colored like how I respond to these things. And I see, the selling internally that has to happen to be successful. Like, if you were a compliance person in a compliance CISO role, you probably wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards that. And so, building those relationships may not be the first thing on your mind. You may be approaching it much more from a policy side, and how do we get things where we can have reporting, and it's a different perspective. And so I do think you're right on that does color a lot of that. And I think where I've given talks on this, my advice is you really need to be aware of who you are to understand what your disadvantages and advantages are, and how to play off those for your success.
Right, which I think all good leaders need to do. Ben, thank you so much for answering our questions. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.